The mainstream media is dying, and that's a good thing.
The entire journalism industry is basically in a freefall.
This freefall has been going on for well over 24 years now, and it all started with the advent of the internet and it becoming more and more mainstream. It's just that we're really seeing the ramifications of it now.
Today, the Los Angeles Times laid off 115 employees. They wiped out their entire DC bureau in an election year.
Oh no! What happened? Oh no, how terrible. That's just awful. How terrible. Oh no.
They laid off pretty much all of their sports teams. They killed their entire tech and business section. They laid off breaking news writers, social media editors. The list goes on.
The question that Taylor Lorenz isn't asking is, why is all this happening? One of the larger issues is the fact that journalism has transformed into a form of activism, and that is pushing away the mainstream audience that isn't far left. You have clickbait articles that are poorly written. On top of that, you have editors that can't do their jobs, and these articles are just laden with typos and spelling errors. The quality that once existed is simply just not there anymore. And on top of that, we've seen the collapse of the almighty ad dollars, which is keeping these sites alive. Kind of.
But what's really dark is this is just the latest in months and months and months of layoffs in the media industry. In fact, tens of thousands of journalists have been laid off in the past year.
I think what Taylor meant to say is that thousands of activists have been laid off because journalism as a profession is largely dead. And it died with objectivity.
Major media companies like BuzzFeed News have completely shuttered their news operations.
And all this transpired only 3 years after BuzzFeed went and bought Huffington Post. And ultimately, BuzzFeed News shuttered because of revenue problems. Reddy explains, saying that he overinvested in BuzzFeed News even though the site didn't have the financial support required to support premium free journalism. And the obvious answer is that journalism is not free. You have to pay people to go and write stories.
Time magazine also just laid off a ton of people, and Sports Illustrated basically shut down last week.
I wonder why. Because sometimes we need to go and state the obvious here on YouTube. It's because they put a biological male on the cover of their girly magazine. And if that's your kink, I don't care. But I can guarantee you that your average male doesn't want to go and buy a girly magazine with a dude on the cover. I'm just saying. This is simply a case of go broke, get woke, and go out of business.
Pretty much the entire digital media ecosystem that myself and a lot of other millennial journalists came up in has been completely hollowed out.
And that's because journalism has been largely hollowed out by journalists such as Taylor Lorenz. What exactly is Taylor Lorenz known for? Oh, let's see here. Going after YouTubers and trying to dox the personal information for the Twitter user, Libs of TikTok. The very fact that she herself has not been laid off yet, I actually find rather appalling.
And it's not just digital media sites. Local news has been obliterated. The newspaper industry is cratering.
Taylor, this is not new. This has been happening for the last 24 years. And largely, this is due to the internet as more and more Americans turn to the internet rather than their local paper to get their news. The other issue that compounds the same situation is the lack of competition in the newspaper space. I'm willing to wager that most cities at one point in time had multiple newspapers. I can tell you San Antonio used to have 2, now we have 1, and that lack of competition has also caused things to stagnate on the local paper front. Also, if you want to go and save local journalism, go and buy a subscription to your local paper.
Radio is essentially dead aside from NPR, which has been gutted. Meanwhile, hundreds of workers at Condé Nast, the parent company of pretty much every major magazine from GQ to Vogue to The New Yorker to Vanity Fair.
And here is another issue when it comes to the mainstream media. It's the fact that you have one organization owning so many magazines, which means it's very easy to go and consolidate the same narrative across all of your major magazines. And this lack of competition is also perpetuating the death of this industry.
Are on strike because they're also facing impending layoffs.
I can guarantee you that those strikes are not going to help the cause any. It's just going to go and throw an accelerant onto the fire.
Even mainstream national media outlets owned by billionaires like the Washington Post, where I work, and the Atlantic, where I used to work, have done layoffs.
And again, the question that is not being asked is, why is this happening? It doesn't matter if a magazine or newspaper is owned by a billionaire. If it is not profitable, the hammer is going to fall. And it starts with the bullshit jobs.
If you're a young journalist today, there's almost no on-ramp to traditional journalism. Even if you do get a job, journalists' salaries have been stagnant and even declined. And by the way, we don't make that much to begin with.
It's the reason why a lot of these journalists tend to come from wealthier families, much like Taylor Lorenz.
I don't think people understand how bad the world would be without journalists.
Taylor, I'm pretty sure the world already knows this because there are no journalists.
And let me just preface this by saying, for people that don't know my background, I did not go to journalism school.
Well, that's pretty apparent, especially when it comes to the ethics side.
I built my own audience on the internet. I came from outside journalism and started as a blogger, and then entered into legacy journalism, a system that I have been incredibly critical of pretty much my entire career.
And it's the same reason why we can't call journalists anymore. They're actually activists because they're not providing objective information to people. They are merely enforcing the narrative.
So I'm definitely not some mainstream media defender.
No, but you're certainly perpetuating its collapse.
And I think the rise of citizen journalism on apps like TikTok, Instagram, and elsewhere has overwhelmingly been a positive thing. The journalism industry is overrun with elite, underqualified, rich, entitled Nepo babies, okay? And that part of it is terrible.
You mean people like yourself, Taylor? Well, you certainly have the entitlement issues down.
But that's not most journalists, and the majority of journalists losing their jobs in situations like this are the working journalists that are doing these investigations of police brutality, or investigating corporations, or holding power to account, or doing really thoughtful, brilliant cultural commentary.
There is a huge difference between being a commentator and a journalist. A commentator's upfront about their opinion. The issue here is that people are trying to pass off their opinion as the news and facts, and that's a problem.
I don't want to live in a world where all of the news is delivered through 60-second TikTok videos with retention editing.
But this is the issue when you turn journalism into clickbait nonsense. And the irony is that people like Taylor Lorenz have contributed to this problem and are now complaining about it.
And I think there's a ton of really talented journalists that are also just not great, like, social media people. I think of some of my friends who are journalists who do really deep investigations or local reporting, or sit through hour-long city council meetings to, hold some local politician to account. That's really important work, and it's work that somebody should pay for, and it's work that's not rewarded by these social media algorithms.
The other thing, too, is that journalism used to be about holding politicians and companies accountable for their actions, but instead have become the megaphone for them.
I would love if everyone could become independent journalists, but the economics are just not there.
But that's the reality of any industry. Competition is important, but when it becomes oversaturated, that causes another set of issues. Not everybody is suited to be a journalist, much in the same ways that not everyone is suited to be an elite athlete. Some people have to work really hard to get there. The reality is that not everybody has the capacity to go and perform that job. And that's not discriminatory, that's just reality.
It's really hard to amass a subscriber base and then retain that subscriber base over time when you're doing investigative work. And that's if you don't get sued out of existence, by the way, after you publish the first critical story of a billionaire.
Well, I guess it depends on whether your hit piece is classified as defamation or not. After all, Taylor Lorenz isn't exactly known for being a journalist, but mainly just writing hit pieces on people.
And I will admit, a lot of these traditional media companies have accelerated their own demise. They ignored the internet for years. They're condescending to content creators and people outside their mainstream ecosystem. They constantly kowtow to corporate and political power.
Holy shit, I'm shocked. That's actually pretty much on point.
They have these false and deluded notions of objectivity, which, by the way, doesn't exist.
And we're right back into the gutter. That deluded notion of objectivity is part of the issue, Taylor. Just saying.
And they push a lot of really racist, sexist, regressive crap.
And it's because what they're doing is actually pushing crap. To say that journalism is coming from a white perspective is a bunch of horse shit.
That's not even why a lot of them are going out of business. A lot of them are going out of business fundamentally because the economics of the media ecosystem are broken. Most news companies used to monetize by advertising, and those ad dollars have been completely subsumed by Facebook and Google and tech giants.
And there's a certain amount of truth to what she just said there. For the most part, it's the reason why the mainstream media has been going after Twitter and YouTube, because they've been vacuuming all the ad revenue from the mainstream media. and they want their cut.
I don't really know where that leads us other than a pretty dire place where there's really no check on corporate and political power in this country. I did write a lot about this in my book called Extremely Online, but I do think that journalism is something a lot of people won't realize they miss until it's gone.
I find her lack of self-awareness to be absolutely astounding. We already know what it looks like to have a lack of journalism because we're already there, Taylor. That's the whole thing that makes what she says so freaking hilarious. Zero, absolutely 0 ounce of self-awareness. Anyway, folks, that is my take. What is yours? Leave a comment down below and let me know what your thoughts are. On your way out, make sure to hit that like button, and if you're new to the channel, go and subscribe. And if you enjoyed this video, I have another one popping up right about here. And I'll catch you next time, folks.